Open our Bibles tonight to the book of Exodus. Book of Exodus. Chapter 2. And we'll begin reading with verse 1. Exodus 2:1. And there went a man of the house of Levi, and took to wife a daughter of Levi. And the woman conceived and bare a son. And when she saw him, that he was a goodly child, she hid him 3 months. And when she could not longer hide him, she took for him an ark of bulrushes, the same word that's used to describe Noah's ark. She took an miniature ark, a small boat that was built just like Noah built the ark. She took an ark of bulrushes, dabbed it with slime and with pitch, the same thing Noah used to waterproof the big ark, and put the child therein, and she laid it in the flags by the river's brink. And his sister stood afar off to wit what would be done to him. And the daughter of Pharaoh came down to wash herself at the river, and her maidens walked along by the river's side. And when she saw the ark among the flags, she sent her maid to fetch it. And when she had opened it, she saw the child, and behold, the babe wept, or cried. And she had compassion on him, and said, "This is one of the Hebrews' children." Then said his sister to Pharaoh's daughter, "Shall I go and call to thee a nurse of the Hebrew women, that she may nurse the child for thee?" And Pharaoh's daughter said to her, "Go." And the maid went and called the child's mother. And I'm pausing because each of these words is, we'll see God's leadership in each of these things. Then Pharaoh's daughter said unto her, "Take this child away, and nurse it for me, and I will give thee thy wages." And the woman took the child and nursed it. And the child grew, and she brought him unto Pharaoh's daughter, and he became her son. And she called his name Moses, for she said, "Because I drew him out of the water." You'll have to excuse me, I am choked up tonight. My throat is being my throat again. Pharaoh's daughter is another one of those characters that we have looked at that we know very, very little about. Everything we know about this Pharaoh's daughter is found in these 10 verses that we just read. What we read is the entire Bible summary of her entire life. Even though she doesn't have a lot of chapters, there's no books named after her, not even a whole chapter named or written about her. And yet what we do know about her tells us a story of divine providence as well as human compassion. Those will be our two main thoughts this evening: divine providence and a heart of compassion. Even though she was probably lost, nothing anywhere to indicate that she was ever saved, She certainly was never part of the nation of Israel. She was an outcast of Israel. She was one of those, her father hated the nation of Israel. But even though she was a heathen by nature, God was providentially moving and guiding and directing in her life, even though she didn't know God was moving and working, and even though she probably would not have gone along with it had she known God was in charge. God was still working and guiding in her life. Even though she probably did not know the true God, He was using her to fulfill His divine plan and purpose. To understand the story that we read, you need to know a little background. And I'm really big on giving the background when we're doing these Bible characters. First of all, in chapter 1 and in verse 8, it says that there arose a new king over Egypt, which knew not Joseph. So there arose a new king. If I were to ask you, what was this king's name? How many of you would know his actual name? Oh, I thought sure y'all would say Pharaoh. Pharaoh is not a name. Pharaoh is a title. Just like we would say president, we would say governor, we would say mayor. Pharaoh was the title because in chapter 1 verse 8, he's called the king over Egypt. And so if you study, there are many, many pharaohs, but each one of them historically has an actual name. So she was the daughter of the king at that time. Joseph had been very influential throughout the land of Egypt. You recall the story. Joseph had been sold by his brothers down into slavery in Egypt. There he was promoted in Potiphar's house. Then he was falsely accused, thrown in prison, where he stayed for several years. Then, because of the guidance of the king's butler, Joseph was promoted to number 2 in the nation. Pharaoh was number 1. Joseph was number 2. And under Joseph, Joseph saved the nation of Egypt from starvation thanks to the wisdom and knowledge that God had given him. Very powerful man. Nobody bought or sold anything in Egypt without Joseph's permission. Then Joseph brought his family, Jacob, his 11 brothers, his sisters, their families, brought all of them down to Egypt, gave them the land of Goshen, which was the prime real estate in that day. Joseph gave his family the best land that Egypt had to offer. And he took care of his family for the rest of the famine. And then for many years after the famine, Joseph was number 2 and took good care of his family. The Pharaoh at that time rejoiced when Joseph's family moved into Egypt. He sent wagons to move them. He told them, don't worry about your furniture. We'll buy you all new furniture. We will take care of you. He rejoiced with Joseph's family. But there arose another king, another Pharaoh, which was not endeared to Joseph. It says he knew not Joseph, not in the sense he didn't know who Joseph was. It's not meaning that he had never heard of Joseph. Certainly, as important as Joseph was, he had to. There's no way he could have avoided it. He had to have heard of Joseph and know what Joseph was and what Joseph had done. But he did not have a personal friendship. He did not have a personal relationship with Joseph. There was no bond with Joseph like the other Pharaoh had had. And so as Pharaoh, this second Pharaoh, or third, fourth, whichever, he thought, you know what? Israel has grown and multiplied and multiplied and multiplied from 70, which were the 70 that originally came down to Egypt, to now they were over 2 to 2.5 million people. Ever how many times that's multiplied? 70, 140, 280, 560, 12, 20. They had multiplied and multiplied. And he begins to think, if we go to war and they join the enemy, they are big enough, they can defeat us. So I've got to do something to stop them from growing and to make their life so that they do not want to join up with our enemy if we ever go to war. And so he began to persecute them. He put great afflictions on them. But I like what chapter 1 says in verse 12. Bill, back to your Sunday school lesson. The more they afflicted them, the more they multiplied and grew. When did the early church grow the most? When they were being persecuted and scattered, or when persecution ceased and they became, according to the 7 churches of Asia in Revelation, they became rich and prosperous and settled and content, and they began to die. When did the church grow most throughout history? When the Catholic Church was killing them by the thousands. When they were being hunted down like dogs and killed like wild animals. They grew and they grew and they grew. And so he said, I'm going to stop their growth. He gave order to the midwives, who were kind of like midwives today. They delivered children. They did not have OBGYNs like we do today. So you would call the local midwife. She would come help you through the birthing process, and then she would go to the next one. He called the midwives in and said, when you see a baby born, if it's a male, you kill it. If it's a female, you let it live. Maids, the ladies feared God and refused to kill any babies. Now, I have to, sometimes my mind gets these thoughts. That would not work today for several reasons. One is you can't know if it's male or female until it gets to be about 5 or 10 years old and makes up its mind what it is. So they couldn't have killed them anyway because they didn't know what it was until it was 5 or 10 years old. And they had to wait to make sure it didn't change its mind and say, I was born in the wrong body. So that wouldn't work today because the ideal was to kill them as soon as they were born, which nowadays we don't know what they are for 5, 10, 20 years. And I'm being very sarcastic with that. By killing all male babies, that would stop all reproduction. But there's also many who believe that Pharaoh had learned somehow that God was going to raise up a deliverer who would deliver Israel out of Egypt. By killing all the male babies, he stopped reproduction, but he also would eliminate any possibility of a leader rising up and leading Israel out of Egypt. At least he thought it would. Little did he know, God was already working in the background to make one exception. And that one exception ended up being the one that Pharaoh wanted to kill the most. Chapter 2, a man, the tribe of Levi, married a lady of Levi. She conceived and they bare a son. And this son was a goodly child. Now, I don't know, and I couldn't find out exactly what the word goodly implies. But there was something about this baby that they knew was going to be special. And so they hid the baby. But after about 3 months, it became impossible to hide the baby any longer. And in chapter 1, verse 22, because the maids, the midwives, would not kill the male babies, in chapter 1, verse 22, Pharaoh commanded his people, if you see a male baby, you take it from the parents and you kill that baby. He knew his own people would do it, whereas the midwives would not. And so he had said, throw the baby into the river, in verse 22. And you got to love this. You've got to. Moses' parents said, Pharaoh ordered us to throw him in the river. We will put him in the river, but we're going to build an ark for him. Technically, they obeyed. They put him in the river, But they disobeyed because they didn't just throw him in. They built a little ark, and they slimed it with slime to make sure that it was waterproof. And they put it in the flags, the weeds, so that it wouldn't be seen by just anybody. But deep down, they believed that somehow God would take care of their child. Well, then now we get to Pharaoh's daughter. That was the background. Moses is in the ark. He's in the bulrushes. He's sealed in a waterproof miniature ark. Now what's going to happen? And I'm going to use some sarcasm. Please do not take me serious. Hopefully you'll recognize the sarcasm. By sheer luck, Pharaoh's daughter decided, I need a bath. Whew. I need to go take a bath. Why that day? Why that time? Why didn't she take a bath the day before? Or decide, not too bad, I can make it another day. Why did she suddenly need a bath on that day at that time? Boy, they sure were lucky that she came along. And you know I do not believe in luck. There's no such thing as luck when God's in control. But she just happened to need a bath on that particular day at that particular time. Had she gone earlier, Moses would not have been in the ark in the flags yet. She would have been there before Moses was. She would have never seen or heard Moses. If she had gotten there later, something else may have already done, taken care. But she got there at the exact, precise moment with God moving and directing. She got there at exactly the right second to see the ark and to send her maids to get the ark and to bring it to her. Wow. Moses was sure lucky that she saw the ark. And please understand, I do not believe in luck. I'm being extremely sarcastic. When she saw the ark, she just happened to be curious. Wonder what that is. She could have been busy, not see it. It's well hidden. She could have seen it and thought, somebody threw their trash out. She could have seen it and thought, I don't know what it is, but it's among the weeds and I don't want to go into it. I don't want my maids to go into it. Whatever it is, just leave it where it is. But not with God in control. She went for a bath at the right time, at the right place. Suppose she had gone upriver or downriver. You see how God was moving in the exact location at the exact time? God made her see the ark because it was well hidden. Somehow God miraculously, divinely opened her eyes and moved the ark at the exact right angle that she saw the ark. Then God led that she was curious. about the ark. God led her to send maids to get the ark. And then when she opened the ark, God made Moses cry at just the right moment. See, if any of these things had changed, everything would have changed. Had she gone a different day, had she gone to a different part of the river, had she not seen the ark, had she not been curious with the ark, had she not retrieved the ark, had she not opened the ark, and had Moses not cried at that precise moment, everything could have changed if any one part of that scenario changed. Everything would have changed. But there are no accidents when God's in control. God put it on the heart of Moses' parents to build an ark and make sure it was waterproof. God put it on the heart of Moses' parents to put it in the river, but to put it inside of an ark. There is no detail too small, but what God's in control. God is leading. God is directing. Sometimes you may wonder why things happen. Why did I have a flat tire now? I'm not God, but maybe. Maybe there was a drunk driver that was coming, and had you continued down that road, he would have hit you, but since you had a flat tire, you had to pull over, and the drunk driver completely missed you. Maybe it was some other purpose. Nothing in your life, nothing in your life happens by accident. Now, for many years, going back to the 70s, when I was the assistant camp director over in Indiana, I would frequently teach on the book of Esther and show God's providence in the book of Esther. And I always use this same illustration. You're standing there and you're talking or whatever, and you happen to notice your shoes are untied, and you bend over to tie your shoe just as somebody shoots an arrow that would have gone right through where you were standing had your shoe not been untied. Well, after last night, we've gotten even closer. I don't know if you've read any of the accounts or not of the attempted assassination. President Trump, I guess we can still call him presidents because he was. President Trump was standing there giving a speech. On the top of a roof, off in the distance, was a guy with a rifle, who, by the way, I read it just before church, a local police officer saw him, went up to the roof, confronted him. He turned the rifle on the police officer, and the police officer had to run back down the stairs and call for help. But before he could call for help, he had already shot the rifle. But here's the amazing part. President Trump, like me, moves a lot. If you've ever watched him, he moves. He turned his head just as the bullet went by and nicked the top of his ear. They said, had he not turned his head at that exact second, had he not turned his head, it would have gone straight through his brain and killed him right on the spot. Why did he turn his head at that exact second? God was providentially leading. I'm going to have to give up my arrow story now because this one's more identifiable. Listen to me. Make sure if you don't get anything else, you get this. There is no such thing as an accident when God is in control. There's no such thing. There's a lot of things we call accidents. An accident implies there's nobody in charge. There's nobody at fault. Instead of accidents, I used to say, oh, I had an accident. Now I say I had a divine providence. If God knows every hair of my head, He knows every breath that I take. He knows every step that I take. He knows every time I turn. He knows everything. Not only does He know it, but He controls it. People ask me very frequently, very often, people ask me not only about me, but about other people. How can you be cheerful with everything going on? And my answer, I used to be bashful. I'm not anymore. My answer is, why not be of good cheer? God's in control. God's on the throne. God's in control. And knowing that God is in complete, total control, whatever He permits in my life, He is in control of it, and He promised me that everything is working together for good to them that love the Lord and to them that are the called according to His purpose. Doesn't it ever bother you with all of your problems? Yeah, occasionally I let the devil get in. Occasionally I let the devil get in my brain, and it's like, oh, woe is me. But then I have to stop and remind myself. Moses was in the river, in an ark, in the bulrushes, in the exact spot where Pharaoh's daughter was going to take a bath, on the exact day, at the exact time. And God loves me just as much as He did Moses, and He controls my life just as much as He did Moses. And you are no different if you're saved. Nothing that happens to you and me is an accident. If you believe in accidents, you need to examine who your father is. My father does not permit accidents. My father divinely guides everything. Pharaoh's daughter was there by divine providence. Not only that, but God was leading Pharaoh's daughter. Well, let me back up. Moses' sister, Miriam, was standing off in the distance, watching, saw what happened, and came down to Pharaoh's daughter and said, you know, you're going to need somebody that has given birth. You're going to need somebody that has given birth and is capable of nursing. Would you like for me to find somebody like that? No, I'll take care of it myself. God was working in Pharaoh's daughter. When Miriam came up, it's like, oh, yeah, I am going to need somebody to nurse this baby. Go find me somebody. Miriam, like a well-trained young lady, went and said, Mom, you're not going to believe the luck we had today. Pharaoh's daughter is looking for somebody that has given birth and is still capable of nursing. And she told me to pick out somebody. Mom, I can't think of anybody better to raise your own son than you. Wasn't he lucky? Miriam being there, Pharaoh's daughter telling a young girl, young girl, go find me somebody. She could have said, I'll find somebody, thanks, but no thanks. But even her desire to allow Miriam to go find someone was still under God's providence. As I studied this past week, to make it even better, remember Moses' mom and dad? Moses, after about 3 months, they could not keep him any longer. Now they not only get to keep him, they get paid to raise their own son. It can't get much better than that. Not only do I get to raise my son, but the king's daughter is going to pay me to nurse and care for and raise my own son. If you don't see God working in every detail, I don't know how to help you. You're beyond help. But then the last thing I notice about Pharaoh's daughter, she was a lady of compassion. Many women would have looked at that baby and say, some parents are trying to disobey my dad. How dare them take that baby and throw it in the river like Dad said. There are some people that probably would have done that. But God gave her a heart of compassion. And when that young baby began to cry, God moved upon her heart to where her heart reached out to that baby, and there was no way she could throw that baby in the river. She wanted the very best care that money could buy. And so she paid to make sure that her baby, that she had spared out of compassion. She spent her own money to make sure that baby was raised the best that it could be raised. What she didn't know is that while Moses' mother was feeding it, she was also indoctrinating it into the ways of the Jewish nation. So what can we learn from us? And I've already covered it, so I'll be brief. God controls even lost people. Just because somebody is lost doesn't mean they're out of God's control. He moved every detail on Pharaoh's daughter, and I won't go into detail because of time, but there have been many thousands of instances where God has used lost people to take care of and provide for saved people without them even knowing God was moving and guiding. God was in the most minute detail. And so he is in our life. If a sparrow cannot fall to the ground, do you think something can happen to you without God's knowledge and consent? Lastly, may God give every one of us a heart of compassion. You know, we live in a time where it's easy to become cynical. When I was with the police department, I had to occasionally, frequently, I would have to just completely back away. Just back away. I became so cynical. I didn't believe anybody, didn't trust anybody. Just think about it. Who do police officers deal with 95% of the time? The scum of the earth. That 5% that you deal with 95% of the time are liars, cheats, thieves, you name it. And you soon begin to think that everybody is a liar, a cheat, and a thief. So I would just have to back off completely. I would say, I'll be back sometime soon, but I got to get away from this. We live in a day and time where there are professional bums. And we look at them and we think, they're nothing but a professional bum. And soon we're judging everybody as a professional bum. And so we get to the point we don't take care of those who truly are in need. She knew her father's decree, and yet her compassionate heart caused her to go against her father. She saw an obvious need. Here's a helpless little baby, 3 months old, who is hungry, who needs changing, who needs care. And her compassion made it happen. It's easy to be judgmental. It's easy to be critical. It's easy to be hard-hearted, even when it's an obvious, genuine need. As a Christian, we should model our lives after the life of Christ, who the Bible says frequently was moved with compassion. We study the life of Christ and we see that he healed the sick. He fed the hungry. He cared for their many physical needs. Because he had a heart of compassion. If you can't think of anything to do, I'll put you in touch with some people, hospitals. I do not get overjoyed and thrilled visiting sick people in the hospital. It's not my top 3 things that I love to do. I don't enjoy going to nursing homes. I go visit my brother. By the way, I went to visit him last week, I think, week before, whenever it was. And I walked in, he doesn't know anybody, but he looked at me and said, "Hey, how you doing, brother? How's the church going?" If that doesn't break your heart, you need to ask God to break it for you. You want to be useful? Volunteer at the hospital. Volunteer at a nursing home. Volunteer at a soup kitchen. Oh, I just believe in preaching the gospel. Jesus definitely preached the gospel. But he also was moved with compassion. He healed the sick, raised the dead, gave sight to the blind, healed the legs of the crippled, all the while preaching the gospel. She was moved with compassion, and she acted on that compassion.